Okay, thank you for joining me today. We have a lot to talk about from this nonfiction author survey that I conducted this summer. I have a lot of insights and data to share from that. If you are writing a book right now or thinking about writing a book, you will find things in the survey results that should help you on your journey, that should make it easier. And if you have already written a book or two, I still think you're going to find a lot of interesting data in the survey of hundreds of other authors, because we can always learn from what other people have done. And it can be tremendously validating, actually, to realize that the things that you've experienced are common to a number of authors. Also, there are some few trends and things that come up in the survey comments that I want to share with you about the publishing world today that I think that you'll find very interesting. So thank you for joining me. I think that you will come away with at least something that helps you or that inspires you on your journey as an author. If you don't already know me, my name is Ann Janzer. I am an unabashed writing geek. I have written and published 4 books. 3 of them are on writing, including The Writer's Process and Writing to be Understood. And this survey that I'm talking about today came about as I'm working on my 5th book, which is called Get the Word Out, Write a Book That Makes a Difference. Just a moment. Okay, so I was researching. I was doing some research for that book, and at first I thought, I'll just interview hundreds or maybe 100 authors about their experiences. And I quickly realized that that wasn't a really scalable thing. I love doing interviews, but for each author interview I did, I would read the book, do a lot of preparation, do the interview, record it, transcribe it, make notes, pull out the data. And I thought, well, there's got to be a better way to gather information from all these authors. So I created this survey for nonfiction authors. And I posted it. It was out for a couple months over the summer, if that, maybe less. And the data that came from this was really useful and informative. And not only did it provide data for the book, but it actually, I think, as you'll see, provided a lot of interesting insights into the experience of being a nonfiction author. So let me tell you a little bit about who responded to this survey, because that's important for putting these results in context. So more than 400 authors responded to the survey. It was an online Google Forms survey, 435 to be exact. And I invited both people who had already published books as well as aspiring authors. So people who were working on a book or people who were thinking of writing a book as well. I invited them to participate because I think that they also have a lot of interesting insights in terms of the experience. So of these authors, so here's how they came out here. Let's see. So the survey asked everybody how many books they had published. And you'll see that something over a third of them had not yet published a book. They were often either in the idea generation or the drafting phase of writing, and we'll get to them in just a moment. But a great many more had published. About a quarter of them had published one book. Almost a quarter had published between 2 and 4 books, and then another slice, 13%, have published 5 or more books. Now, again, these are all nonfiction authors. Some of them had also published fiction books because people tend to write sometimes in more than one genre. But here, when it comes to the types of nonfiction books that they had written, you'll see that my respondents skewed heavily perhaps to business and career advice books. That is an artifact of a few things. One, some of the people I hang out with in online spaces, right? Because I come from a marketing background. I had some of the people who helped me share the word about their book. It included Douglas Burdett of the Marketing Book Podcast. So I had a bunch of business book authors that were really wonderful respond there. I also had a number of self-help authors, memoir authors, history, science, technical. The other category, as you might guess, is vast. These numbers add up to more than the numbers of people who responded to the survey, and that's because, first, many people had written more than one book, and second, sometimes people feel their book falls in a couple categories. Now, I'm really interested in getting at what's the basis from which we write our books? What's the source of our expertise? You know, because one of the things sometimes that stops people from writing a book is a sense that, well, I'm not expert enough. I don't have enough expertise. So I asked this question 2 times in the survey. First, I asked people to list or select from a checklist all of their sources of expertise for writing a book. And those include personal experience, professional experience, academic credentials. You know, I thought of a lot of things: primary research, journalistic research. I added a category for a whole bunch of reading and thinking, because I thought that's just how some people are going to think about what they've done. And in fact, I was right. A lot of people selected that. So the first time I asked it, people could choose all of the boxes that applied. And you'll see that there is, most people do, in fact, write from personal or professional expertise, but they also fill different expertise buckets. They do other research. They get input from other experts. They do surveys. They do interviews. So I thought that was interesting. And then I asked them to just pick one. If you had to pick one primary source of expertise for your book, what would it be? And here you can see that professional experience is the top answer, followed by personal experience. The professional experience is not a surprise because, as I said, many my survey respondents may have skewed more towards business and career advice books. But it's an interesting point that really most of us write from experience. We are grounded in our experience as we write, and then we flesh it out through other things. So I asked the unpublished authors where they were in the process of writing, because I thought that was an interesting thing to know as well. And you'll see that a great many of them were writing, which is not a surprise. That's a long time consuming part of the process, right? And almost as many were in the idea generation phase, which is interesting, and we're going to circle back to that in a bit when we look at where people get stuck. But they're trying to come up with the idea for their book. Some were doing proposals. Some were actually, you know, had books with the editor in publication process. But everyone was actively engaged in working on their books. So that brings us to the first set of insights that comes from this survey, has to do with the process of writing a book itself. Now, if you haven't written one yet, you probably have an idea in your head of how this goes. You come up with a book idea, you do a bunch of research, you create an outline based on what you have from that research. Maybe you do a little more research. You write the draft, you revise it, and then it goes off into publishing, or you publish it yourself, or whatever happens next. So if you think about the process that way, it looks pretty straightforward. You can plan it, you can schedule it, you can make some guess of how long it's going to take, right? So what I wanted to get at was, with these questions, was how closely did the experience of writing a book and publishing a book match your expectations for it? So the first question here was just that. It was, you know, how long did it take you to write your book? And not how long in absolute terms, but compared to what you expected. So on a scale of 1 to 5, with 3 being, you know, it took as long as I planned, 1 is it took a lot less time, and 5 is it took a lot more time. Where did your experience fall? And as you can see from this graphic, it tends to take more time than you think, right? So maybe not quite 30% completed the book in the time that they expected. And this could be because now we also have some fairly experienced authors on this answering the survey. As you remember, a certain number of them had written, between 2 and 5 books. It turns out we're not all that good at estimating how long a big project like writing a book will take. And often life experiences get in the way, and that's to be expected. But one of the respondents, I thought, so the survey included some areas where people could offer free-form responses and advice. And throughout this survey, this webinar, I'm going to sprinkle in a few of those quotes, which are anonymous. People knew they would be anonymous, but I think that some of them really express things very well. And here's a point somebody made. The writing itself didn't take more time than expected, but the overall process did. Researching, reviewing, thinking and rethinking, framing, and making myself sit down to actually write. So here's the takeaway. If you're thinking of writing a book, of course, there's the time that you spend writing the draft, but there's all of that other time involved in putting everything together. So as you're planning how long it's going to take, enough time for all those different phases. And we're going to get a little more into what that might look like. So then, research is, because we're talking nonfiction, most nonfiction authors have some amount of research. If you're writing memoir, it might just be a little bit of supporting research to make sure that you're remembering things or to get more supporting detail. So the thing about research, again, if you, in your vision of how the book goes, you might think, well, I research and I outline, maybe research a little more, and then I write. And that has never been my personal experience. So this was one of the interesting bits of feedback from the survey. I asked people, did you finish your research before you started drafting? And about 16% of the authors said yes, they completed the research first, and then they wrote their book, their draft, their manuscript. And about 60% said no, they kept researching as they were drafting. 60%. And then there's another, almost a quarter, it's like 23.7%, who said, I thought I had finished my research, but then I started drafting the manuscript and realized you had to go back, right? So as you are thinking and planning, two things to keep in mind here. One is that as you are thinking of your writing process, remember that research kind of continues on even as you're drafting. And if you are in the research phase, don't try to finish it all before you draft. You try to get enough to start working, because often writing will spur new ideas for research, right? As you write, you'll realize, oh, I'd really love a little bit on this, or I'd really love to understand that better, or maybe I need somebody to chip in and give me some background on this. So the boundaries between research and writing are porous. You may go back and forth. Outlining. Now, this is a real interesting topic. So, if you're submitting a book proposal and you get a deal with a traditional publisher, your book proposal includes an outline for your book, right? So you might think, I'm done with outlining. They've bought the book. I sold the proposal. This is my outline. I'm going forward. So my question in the survey was, how closely did your final draft match your outline? And less than 6% stuck to their original outline. Less than 6%. Let's just let that sink in for a moment. And remember, I have a lot of traditionally published authors in this response, or I haven't told you that yet, but I do. A lot of the authors who are working with traditional publishers. So they sold an outline to the publisher in their proposal, and yet less than 6% of my total responses stuck exactly to that outline. More than half made minor changes to the outline, and more than a third made major changes. That's that big orange part of that pie. Major changes to the outline. And for 3%, and I feel these people, 3% said it's a whole new outline. They chose that option. It's a whole new outline. They started out on one path and they ended up with an entirely different outline. I often make major changes. So for me, this was one of those responses that was really, really validating. I get stuck. I write about half of a rough draft and I just start spinning my wheels and I realize the outline isn't working. Something's not working here. I pull it apart, re-outline it, and go off. I think of this as the messy middle of the draft. And when I do it now, when I encounter it now, I welcome it. I know it's part of my process. So I'm part of those people in the orange that makes major changes partway through. So what should you take from this if you are working on a book or going to work on a book is this: you start out with the best outline that you can, but don't be afraid to improve it as you write. As you write, you may outgrow the outline that you started with and come up with a better way to present that. And it doesn't matter, your publisher is going to want a better way to present it. They're not going to say, you have to stay with this outline. Nobody sticks to that original outline unless you're part of that 6%. All right. So that's a very important takeaway. Then I asked the unpublished authors where, if anywhere, they got stuck in the process. Where did they kind of get stuck? I offered a range of different check boxes, from deciding on the topic, getting a publisher, finding the time. But really, you can almost clump them into groups. The top two responses are deciding on the topic or coming up with something original to write about. Those are both sort of idea generation focused places where people get stuck, where that's not even kind of getting started. They're wrestling at the very beginning. Two of them really have to do with the process, which is finding the time to write and getting motivated to write. And finding the time to write is the biggest, most common place where people get stuck. So that's a very interesting insight. The next three really have to do with publishing or production, which is finding an agent or a publisher or financing the production of my book, things like that. Some get stuck in the messy middle, right? Which is, I'm halfway through and it's not working. That's often an issue of needing a new outline. And then, of course, people had other responses. But this is illuminating to know, too, where we often run into trouble. And if you yourself are struggling in one of these spots, it's good to know that you are not, in fact, alone. So the survey had a lot of checkbox questions, but then it also had some questions soliciting open-ended answers. If one of them was, what's the biggest surprise that came from you from writing and publishing a book? And this was for the authors who had written and published books. People are so generous with their time and their wisdom. I am so grateful to everyone who took the time to fill out this webinar, because they really spent time and were very thoughtful about their experiences. So I'm going to share some of that with you. But the biggest surprise, I made this little word cloud. You can kind of see, hard work, that's there. How much marketing is one. And then there's a fair amount in here about publishing and publishers and publishing. It all kind of, so two themes that I want to talk about are publishing and marketing, because these are two trends that I see emerging from the data that it's really important to understand as you go about your author journey. So let's talk about publishing. The world of publishing has changed so much, even in the last year. Crikeys, it's changed as retail bookstores have shut down. So publishing was a source of surprise for the published authors. They were surprised by what did and didn't happen with the traditional publisher. It's also a source of confusion and uncertainty. And if you look at the aspiring authors, the ones who are working on a book but not yet published, I asked them how they plan to publish their book. And it's very interesting because only about 13% are planning to take the traditional publishing route, which is with a major publisher or a smaller academic press. That's the sort of teal blue and the red up in the corner of that pie chart. That's only about 13%. Now, there's a big almost a quarter of them, the orange on the bottom, is people who are going to try the traditional publishers first. And then if that doesn't work out, they're going to self-publish or take another route. Fully 30% don't know how they're going to publish. They just don't know. So there's just a lot of uncertainty around publishing. It used to be there was one way to get a book out, and now there's a bunch. And this is a source of some confusion for authors. It's also a source of enormous opportunity. A quarter of them fully plan to publish themselves, that's the green, and a small number plan to work with a hybrid publisher. And I'm going to talk more about hybrid publishers coming up, because I think that's an interesting trend that is emerging from the data that is worth exploring. When I asked the published authors how they had published their most recent book, remember many had several, so almost half of them had taken the traditional publishing route with a major publisher or a small and academic press. Those are the two blue options on this chart. More than a third had self-published or were indie authors, and 12% had chosen the hybrid publisher path. So this is interesting. Here we see that published authors are more aware of and savvy to the hybrid publishing option in many cases. And the other category, again, became too diverse to list out in the pie chart. But when it came to the question about there were two open-ended questions. One was, what's your biggest surprise? And one was, what would you do differently next time for your next book? And comments about publishing they were right up at the top for the things that surprised them most and the things that they would do differently the next time around. The surprises were often around what the publisher did or did not do. People have sometimes outdated visions of what publishing is like. They think they'll deliver the draft and then the publisher will take care of marketing and promoting, and they just go show up and sign books from time to time. And that's just not the reality today. So we will get into that in a moment when we talk about marketing, but often it was, whoa, I was surprised by how little the publisher did to promote the book. They just kind of made the book, and it was up me to do the rest. So things they would do differently, though, I think it's really important to remember that we're all subject to the grass is greener effect. I don't know if you know the saying about the grass is always greener on the other side of the fence. And I think that seems to be true when I looked at the specific comments about publishing. Some said, well, I would shop it to a larger publisher next time, or I was with a traditional publisher, but I would go with a different one. Or someone said, well, I would traditionally publish, but I'm going to self-publish next time. And someone else said, I'm going to find a hybrid publisher. So there's a lot of this wanting to do something different with their publisher. I think it's important to remember there is no one right path. There is no one right option. There's no, you got the right answer. I don't think so. Every approach you have has its drawbacks, its pros and cons. It's very important to be aware of what those are. I said I wanted to, the comments about hybrid publishers were bubbling up. Now, hybrid publisher is, I'm probably not going to define this right. It is not a traditional publisher. A traditional publisher will buy the rights for you, pay you in advance, then they own the book, they make the profits, they give you a royalty. An indie publisher like myself, I publish myself, I hire designers and stuff, but I essentially act as the publisher. So I own the rights. I get, I take all the risks, I reap the rewards. A hybrid publisher is something in between, right? They're going to help you with the process of creating the book, but you generally retain your rights. You get a much larger part of the royalty, but then you pay more for the production. So you take on more of that risk up front, and you reap more of the rewards. And they can be more of a true partner for you in this process. And one person here left a comment that said, in moving to a hybrid publisher, I found a greater partner, champion, and team than I could ever have expected at a traditional business publisher. self-publishing and the hybrid model have matured so much in the past decade and offer a tremendous opportunity for authors and readers alike. So what I'm seeing is sort of a growth of this hybrid publishing, these different options in publishing beyond the traditional ones. And I think that's an important trend I see emerging in this data. This respondent, I thought, put it very well. It was very interesting. So let's talk about book marketing, because my friends, that is the pain point for many authors. One of the biggest surprise was like how much work there is to do to market the book, how little the publisher markets, how much I have to market the book, how long it goes on, right? Many people were surprised by the book marketing. In fact, so 14% of the comments where people commented on the biggest surprise, 14% of those comments had to do very explicitly with book marketing. And it was the main topic of what I would do differently next time. When asked what I would do differently, 1 in 4 of the answers had to do with marketing and promoting the book. Often it was, I would have a better marketing plan. I would start marketing earlier. I would do more and better marketing. I would do more marketing after the sale. I mean, all kinds of answers. The takeaway for you, for every author, is that marketing is, of course, our obligation as authors. Doesn't matter how you're published, marketing is your obligation, and you need to actually consider it as part of your book process. That's the lesson I think I'd like everyone to take away, is thinking about how to market that book. I was also really, really interested in getting at why people wrote nonfiction books, what were their motivations, and then did the experience of writing and publishing the book meet those expectations? Did it actually fit, answer the motivations? Did it meet their objectives? So I came up with a set of motivations or goals for writing a book based on what I've heard people say. And these were the options people could choose from. Personal goal, I've always wanted to publish a book. A business goal, I want to build my speaking or consulting business. People write books to make themselves more marketable in their careers. Purpose, I want to serve others with what I know. That's a sort of more altruistic motive, if you will. Fame and fortune, I'd like to be a best-selling author and, live the high life. Or personal fulfillment, I just really want to share this story or this idea. And then, of course, there's an other category, and I got a lot of others, as you might have guessed. So, as with the question about expertise, I asked this question twice. So first, people had the opportunity to choose all of those objectives that applied, my personal goal and fame and fortune and career, whatever it may be. And interestingly, the clear winner in terms of the goal that most people share is purpose, serving others. Again, my respondents skewed towards business and career advice. So you would expect business goals or career goals to be fairly well represented, and they are, but they are not the overwhelming favorite. Personal fulfillment, I'm happy to see that fame and fortune was pretty low, because that's a hard motivation to know that you're gonna get. So people got to answer all of their objectives, and I think it's very interesting that I think 80% of them chose purpose, serving others with what I know. Then they could just choose their primary motivation. They had to say, what's the one? If I had to pick one, what is it? And again, here, purpose is the winner, serving others with your ideas. Nearly 40% chose that. 17% chose a business goal. Now, this was really encouraging to me, because I think that you, first of all, if you focus on the purpose for your book, you are more likely to make the right decisions about how to create it, how to write it, how to market it, how to package it. You are more likely to keep going through the long run of writing. This is, in fact, the premise of my upcoming book, right? Get the Word Out, which is focus on that purpose of how you serve others, and the rest of your path becomes a little bit easier. So it was great for me to see that this is already embedded in so many authors' mindsets and objectives. So then the question remains, so that was their objectives. Did the experience of writing a book actually live up to those expectations? This is a question I asked of the published authors. First, I asked about those who had professional goals. On a scale of 1 to 5, did it meet their expectations? 1 being, not at all, and 5, it completely exceeded, and 3 is it met my goals. And as you can see, there is about 7% that it didn't work out so much for with their personal goals, but generally 83% of the authors, it either met or exceeded their personal goals. So that is a very encouraging bit of data. Then I asked about their personal goals. So met or exceeded their professional. I believe I misspoke. Met or exceeded professional goals. And I asked about their personal goals. And here it did, writing and publishing a book did even better. There were a few people for whom it just didn't deliver what they had hoped. But 89% of the respondents writing and publishing a book either met or exceeded their personal goals. So that, again, that's very encouraging. I love to see that data. Now, as I mentioned, the authors were very generous and forthcoming with their advice for other authors. So I'm going to share with you a few of the tidbits that came from the survey, and specifically that came from the open-ended comment area of the survey. I did ask the question, what would you do differently, if anything? And the answers are obviously as varied as the authors who responded. I would have gotten an editor, I would have done this. But again, some themes emerged beyond publishing and marketing, which we've already discussed. And one of them had to do with time. So a number of people would do something differently about how they manage the time around their book. Generally giving themselves more time. These are some excerpts from the comments themselves. I would give myself more time. I would spend more time rewriting. I would say that's the revision phase, but leave more time for revision. Allow more time for editing. Spend more time on research. Sometimes we are in such a hurry to get the book done that we might shortchange things and look back and say, I wish I'd done something different. And this is, to me, the counterpart of that advice that you're going to hear. You see people say, oh, write your book in a weekend, or, you can do it in 3 weeks or something, quick and easy. These published authors are saying, no, this is an important part of putting my message out, of serving others. I wish I'd spent more time, given myself a little more time for it. So that's a little bit of insight for you as you plan going ahead. Not to try to crush the deadlines too tightly. We all need deadlines to motivate ourselves. So you've got to find that right balance of enough momentum to keep you going, but not so much that you're shortchanging the process. And I want to wrap by leaving you some inspiring words from these generous authors who shared the survey responses. Again, all anonymous. I'm so grateful to them. I'm just going to leave you a few of these. One says, there is still magic in being a published author, but now I realize that many of the rewards are internal for confidence, etc. I think that's a really interesting point. It is, writing and publishing a book can be a life-changing way and event, not always in the ways that you think. No other thing has opened up my business and my platform to new opportunities like being an author. That clearly came from one of my business-focused authors. And this one, I love this one. It's worth it if your idea of success is free from attachment to income. So you're probably not going to make millions, right? You might probably not make millions on your book. But if you separate that out, if you set the right expectations, you are likely to be able to achieve them. And a couple more just to fuel you on your writing journey as you go. Someone says it's been fascinating and fulfilling. I have to agree with that one. Another person says writing books is the joy of my life. I love everything about the process, and I hope to keep doing it for the rest of my life. What I want to say about this quote is that it's become the joy of my life too. Not everybody is going to love everything about the process, but if you approach it from a joyful sense, if you approach it with a sense that I am going to love everything about this, I think that comes through in the writing, and it will be much more pleasant. And this last point, this is for anyone who's stuck in the idea generation phase, says this: I need to keep reminding myself that while some of what I'm writing has been said before, no one has put it together the way I have or said it with my voice. What I am writing does have value to others. I hope that helps you if you feel a little bit stuck or a little worried about being original. Super quickly, because I know that many of you are nonfiction authors or you wouldn't be here, I'm just going to share a couple things I learned about the process of doing this survey itself. This is the first time I'd conducted a survey on this scale. I am not claiming scientific, statistical relevance to the survey. It's simply a survey, a way to get information at scale. There are multiple tools for doing this, among them SurveyMonkey is really popular. I ended up choosing Google Forms because I had used it once before, and because it had the ability to create a survey with a couple paths. So everybody answered a certain set of questions, and then the unpublished authors answered some, and the published authors answered some, and then everybody can, so I had that ability to create something with a fork in the logic. And as you can see, I don't know, I gave you a little screenshot of it's just really easy. The interface is, I thought, pretty intuitive to put together. It also creates these lovely, automatically, these little pie charts from your results, which I could have cut and pasted, except for the way that I created the questions. What happened with me, here's an example about your most important reason for writing a book. I had a response that was other. And then when you put in other, people could then answer their other response. And then, so instead of putting them all together in other, what Google does is creates one individual little slice of the pie for each other answer, because everybody's other is different, right? So I still had to go in and clean up the data because of the way I wrote the survey. I think were I to do this again, I would have an other that is not expandable. I'd have an other that's not expandable, and just then follow up with a free form field that let people do that. So the hardest part, of course, is getting multiple people to the survey. How do you get people to spend time filling out a survey, spending all this time giving thoughtful answers? I ended up getting 400 people because of the generosity of people in my network who shared it with others, for which I'm really, really grateful. Of course, it saves you time gathering data, but then you do spend a lot of time with the data when the survey is done, of course. And again, beware of those open-ended responses. You could spend an infinite amount of time on those. So all of this was in support of my upcoming book called Get the Word Out, Write a Book That Makes a Difference. That book is right now on pre-sale. It will come out November 10th, just a little over 2 weeks, and it's discounted through the pre-sale period. So if you found any of this stuff useful, you may find information in that book useful as well. It includes interviews and other research and advice and exercises. So that concludes the main part of this presentation. I would invite you to go to my website, annjanzer.com. You can find out more about the book. There's also a post there about the survey, and you can find it, and you can actually order or download the PDF with a bunch of data from this survey. And if you don't find that on my website, send me an email, which is ann@annjanzer.com, and I will be happy to send you that survey.